So there's three things that I wanted us to ponder today. First thing is the term future-proof. We hear it quite a bit. We see it a lot in the world now. And of course, a lot of people will say, oh, that's a new term. That's how do you sort of protect yourself or your business from being relevant. Well, what we're going to learn is actually a lot of things come from the past. Future-proofing is a term that originates in the 60s from the world of architecture. For example, if we look out here right now and see the bridges that are constructed, those were constructed with future-proof in mind. The last thing that you want to do is have to recreate a bridge every 20 years. The same thing is true in business. We don't have to necessarily want to recreate ourselves every year or two. We want to figure out how we actually stay relevant. So 3 questions we want to think about this morning. The first is, what does average mean? There's a tendency in the world now for us to think about, how do we appeal to the average? What is the best practice? How do we reach the average customer? We see this even in areas like politics. How do we reach the average voter? The second is asking, what is intelligence? There's a tendency of many of us to think that intelligence is those who are very good at math, science, or language. We'll actually look and refute that. There's 9 different types of intelligence, many which are very important in terms of adding value to business. And the third is why we should study retro trends. Why we should study the past. Because almost every single thing that we'll see in future-proofing is rooted in the past. We just have to find people who are good at pattern recognition to apply this. So 3 ways to future-proof your business. Banning averages, strengthening different types of intelligence, and studying culture and trends. All right, let's dive into the first one. What does average mean? So if we think about education, most of what we see is, does this person make the median grade? When we actually build products, there's a tendency of many of us to say, how do we actually create this for the average? The issue with this in hand is that many times we don't realize that not everyone is the same. When we're aiming for the average, we're missing lots of people. We're missing a lot of people on the edge. We're missing a lot of marginalized groups. So this is important in terms of us understanding how personalization works. The second, what is intelligence? This is quite interesting because if we look at this, the 9 different types of intelligence. So I'm sure this is maybe the same in Australia. It's very true in America. You have the stereotype of the dumb jock. The person who, is dumb but plays sports. They're actually quite intelligent because they have high bodily kinesthetic intelligence. If we look at some of the other things, you have existential intelligence, natural intelligence, spatial intelligence. This is important to learn because in our discussions around automation, there's a tendency of people to say, well, what do I do if machines can actually do math better than me? What do I do if language is replaced by automation and I don't have to learn a language because machines are able to do that better? Well, if we look at this, there are other areas with a growth mindset that we can grow and become stronger in. When it comes to retro trends, so if I actually handed out a piece of paper to everyone here and said, I want you to come up with the most original idea you have. And then we graded those. What we would find is that none of those ideas would be original whatsoever. Humans are not good at original ideas. Humans are good at taking ideas that have already been invented and creating new patterns out of them. What did Picasso say? Good artists copy, great artists steal. Granted, intellectual property lawyers, they're probably not going to be happy with that. But if we think about what we have here, copying, transforming, combining, that's how we find new ideas. That's also something interesting to pay attention to. later in the presentation when we get to the types of people that should be in your organization. That's the number one thing that we don't think about when it comes to ideas, is who are those people? What are their experiences? How old are they? And how do they all intersect? Now, I'm not going to bore you with big data. Yes, I work at Microsoft, but that's the last thing that we want to talk about here. Let's just put our design thinking cap on for a second and pretend that in the near future, big data is solved for through artificial intelligence. Now, I know what you're saying, Jeff, I could barely get my alarm clock to work this morning, and you're talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence. But let's say there are systems in the near future that handle unstructured data and structured data. What does that leave you to do? Since marketers, their number one ask this past year in some research that we had done is figuring out how all these broken pieces are glued together. What does that mean you have to do? If you basically have AI that is able to map all of these ecosystems for us, and again, I'm not saying this exists now, but if this exists in the next couple of years, what does that mean for us? What does that leave for us to do? Those of us who work in the creative industry, those of us who work at agencies, in marketing, advertising, etc. Well, before we answer that question, let's have the anthropological discussion here. So if you didn't study anthropology at university or you were too busy looking at your laptop, let's do a little bit of a refresher here. We have to look at where history has actually been so that we can figure out where it's going. So we look at the second agricultural revolution that happened in Great Britain, that leads to the industrial age, that leads to the information age. Quick shout out to anyone. Why do I have the information age ending in starting in 1989 on this particular slide? Who has the answer to that? What happened in 1989? Shout it out. Internet is one. Tim Berners-Lee issued his report. What's the other big thing that happened in history in 1989? Berlin Wall. You had brain drain that moved around the world. It's important things to note. Many times we think like history isn't important, that the humanities isn't important, that we should just talk about technology. All these things are interconnected. So that leads to this big bubble known as the experience age. Now, why is this happening in 2016? One of the things is developers are actually developing to the experience platform. We see this with a number of different technologies. Snap uses the experience platform because it allows your camera to sort of navigate the world. Pinterest does that. Heck, even if you use the Bing app on your phone, you're able to actually take pictures and it's able to navigate the world for you. This is the area that we're now moving into. It allows us to understand the world that goes beyond language, that deals more with experiences. This also is important to note because it allows us to sort of move into banning the average. If things are about the experience age, then it moves into what is everyone's individual experience. And that is something that has been difficult for a number of companies to understand in terms of navigating. We have a tendency of looking at things in a transactional standpoint. What we should be looking at is how is everyone their own artist in the world? There's a tendency of many of us not to think about art. We talk a lot about STEM education, science, technology, education, math. Actually, it should be STEAM. Art is a very important part of critical thinking and understanding the world. And this ties into the experience portion of understanding the world around us. How are we understanding what people's personal experiences are? Now, this, of course, leads to the rise of intelligent assistants, being able to not only ask questions and get answers, but possibly your intelligent assistant understanding you based on the motivations of what's happening. And I actually encourage all of you to dive a little bit deeper into the 2019 Microsoft Voice Report. This was issued by our search evangelist, Christy Olson. Fascinating material here in terms of the adoption rate of voice and where it's headed. The interesting thing, too, is if we think about the Twitterverse, and that's a terrible place sometimes to hear from people. There's a tendency of a lot of strategists who look like me to say, voice is irrelevant. I use my phone because I type with my fingers, and there's no way I'm ever going to use voice. They have no empathy to understand that many people in the world do not have use of their limbs. Voice actually allows them to use technology. So we have to, again, think like designers in terms of what are we opening up to all groups. So where do we begin to ban this average? The first thing is understanding people. We have a tendency of forgetting a lot about that in advertising. The last 10 years has really been about technology, systems, integration, every other technical acumen. We've almost gotten away from the psychological standpoint of what it is to understand audience. And I think this is another reason why audience-based buying has become big again. People want to reach particular audiences of all shapes, sizes, etc. One good example, and we see this quite a bit, is what Nike has done. The interesting thing there is there was so much debate in the United States around this ad, especially with Colin Kaepernick, that everybody missed the 9 other stories in the advertising. So if we actually look at this from an audience standpoint and banning the average and looking at the fringe, we'll realize the other people that are actually in this advertisement. You have Nia Houston. All right, he's a skateboarder. He has never broken a bone in his body. Why? Because he's a vegan. That's what he attributes it to. Zina Nassar. She sued the World Boxing Organization because she wears a hijab when she's in the ring, and she's won a lot of fights, and she actually won that lawsuit. Lacey Baker, first openly queer skateboarder to be on the Nike skateboarding team. And then the other one that's really interesting, the United States women's national team who just won the World Cup. You know, they're suing the US Soccer Federation for equal pay. Yet we missed all these stories because we ran directly into Colin Kaepernick and had to figure out what was going on there. We missed the fringe. We missed all of the elements on the edge because we were looking for the average. So this might be good, this might be bad. This is Gary Vee, for those who might know him. Now, I use this example because last year, K-Swiss, which is a sneaker brand that looks similar to what I'm wearing on my feet right now, they're based in Los Angeles, issued a shoe that Gary Vee designed. And I remember talking to the CEO and said, why would you design something around this person who's just very loud on social media? Well, Jeff, we wanted to reach the entrepreneurial class, that rabid section, that niche market, who we knew would buy our shoe. And what we actually discovered here is that is the best-selling shoe now for K-Swiss. It's been out of stock, I think, for the last 12 months, and they're trying to figure out how to get it back in. So the learning here is, while we think about the average and the mass, who is that niche that we can actually reach to start that sort of fire for us? And we're seeing a lot of this in the direct-to-consumer space, because a lot of DTC brands, they don't necessarily have the money to go after mass, so they're trying to reach niche. This is interesting because this is a photo from National Geographic. This is what the average person will look like in 2030. Hard to tell what average is going to mean anymore when we think about it. Now, another area in terms of banning the average and leading more into personalization is what voice will do. Now, I wanted to actually showcase this for you rather than just showing the slide. So let me bring this up for a second here. What this basically is going to do is this takes into account my search results, what I've been searching for, and then tries to recommend for me what I may like or may not like. And because I don't like the way that voice assistants are always programmed in a female voice, I decided, hey, I'm going to put this in a male voice that has an Australian accent. And I'm going to also have French translation, because why not? You can use Microsoft Cognitive Services to do that. So let's take a listen to this of what voice might do to ban the average. Alexa, open Microsoft Advertising. Alexa. Hold on one second, folks. Let's go this way, actually. Hey, Cortana, open Alexa. Oh, my. The lovely part of doing a tech, Alexa, are you there? All right. That's not working. So we'll figure that out. Anyhow, let me explain a little bit more to you, and I'll play it to you afterward. What it does is it basically asks, based on my search activity, what some things I'd like to discover are. And it knows I've been looking for a lot of music, so it basically refers me to a lot of music artists, but then it also refers to me to other content that I might be interested in. It becomes that personalized assistant for me that, again, bands the average. So this, of course, leads to the discussion around v-commerce, and this has been a huge discussion in the industry right now that opens up a whole new area of experience. So again, if we're building for the experience platform and we're talking about voice and v-commerce, what are some of the things that could happen there? What are some of the personalized experiences that all of us in the room can think about in terms of developing for others? So if we've banned the average in design, let's move into that second section. What intelligence do we need? So again, you have 9 different types of intelligence. What's going to really work in the areas as things become more automated? What are some of the skill sets that rise to the top? Things like emotional intelligence, things like empathy, things like understanding other people's points of view. Things that are maybe more interpersonal, understand context. These are things we have to think about in terms of how we look for skill sets, not just off in the next couple of years, but right now. How are we actually developing those skill sets now to help enhance our business models? It's interesting, too, in terms of intelligence, because this past year, when we've looked at different studies, we have 15 of the 75 human behavioral trends just this past year we've identified. Again, technology helps us deliver experiences, but what is the human condition? How do we use that intelligence to understand what is out there? And we actually dive deep, or do a deep dive on one trend in economics and entrepreneurship. There's this trend now known as passive loyalty. Some of you may have heard about it, some may have not. What this is actually getting many of us in business is to question, how loyal are customers? In fact, how loyal are our own employees? And a lot of this is based on the questions we actually ask. Because we have a tendency of asking people, hey, how happy were you in your transaction? What we should be asking them is, how happy are you using our service day to day? That's when we get a better answer usually. Not when the transaction is taking place, but in the day-to-day evolution. So this is questioning, again, if customers are as loyal as we make them out to be. Now, when it comes to intelligence, we have to also apply this into business models. And of course, there's the fascinating business model known as Netflix, and I love to use this example because it really gets us thinking about, okay, what if scenarios, which leads back to design thinking. Netflix really started out shipping DVDs to people around the country, and then quickly said, all right, we're going to use streaming to deliver that experience, and then said, we're going to actually create our own content. So the next question is, where do they move next? And we should think about how we apply this to our businesses. Where do we move in areas that we may think, oh, that doesn't make sense for our business, but it might make sense from the customer standpoint? We're starting to see some interesting things too in the retail sector. There's a retailer known as Urban Outfitters in the United States. They decided to buy a number of food chains. Why would they do that? Well, what they noticed is many people were leaving their stores saying, I'm hungry. So by buying food companies, they keep people within that experience. Doesn't make sense to the financial markets, makes a lot of sense from a customer standpoint. So this, of course, leads to what's the next blur in our vertical. We've seen tons of blurring this past year. Holding companies being blurred into management consultancies. Technology companies becoming advertising companies becoming technology companies. There's no real sort of right answer here. So this leads to the third section, studying culture and trends. And there's a tendency in the world for many people to say, okay, how do we study the future? And the problem is they look at the current and then they try to figure out what the future is. What they should be looking at is the last 40, 50 years. Great example, 2018. Did this happen in Australia, by the way? The daddy sneaker trend? Okay, so worldwide trend. You know, the bigger your sneaker was, the better it was. Of course, it was crazy in terms of the price point. This is really a remix. It's a remix of something that happened in 2001 that Skechers created. And how do we know this? Let's take a look at this video from 2001. Look at that Big Daddy sneaker from 2001. So the interesting thing here is we may think Kylie Jenner was stylishly innovative in 2018 because she was the one that sort of influenced this. But Britney Spears did it before in 2001. My point here is, who do you have in your organization that can recognize patterns? If they're so new to the world, they're always going to say, hey, this is the freshest trend without really understanding the context of where it came from. We have an ageist problem in this industry. We need to think about how we actually incorporate everyone because they may see some of those patterns. And younger people then can develop upon those. So voice assistants is another area where we think is brand new. So you have a tendency of people to say like, hey, this is a new phenomenon that smart speakers created. And I got a smart speaker and I talk into it. Yeah, tell that to the voice-enabled assistants from 2005.
When seconds matter, the pros turn to Nextel Direct Connect. First responders, healthcare professionals, business people, field services, transportation, construction, families, friends, and you. Communicate in an instant to one person or your entire work group with just the push of a button. Locate, navigate, track, and manage. Connect with up to 20 people at once. Distribute voice messages by email. Send pictures and contact information while on a call, all on the fastest national push-to-talk network. Nextel Direct Connect, only on the Now Network.
Now, the interesting thing is, with this example, someone said, oh, yeah, you know, Jeff, though, those are people on the other side from 2005. Yeah, but you can basically talk through voice assistants now to other people. That connection is always going to happen. So again, how do we recognize all these different patterns? This is known as the conjoint effect. It's something we all need to understand. People, brands, celebrities, content creators, they're all acting like each other now. They're all stealing each other's ideas. What does that mean for future proofing? That means that the people who come up with the most interesting ideas are your most important resource if the conjoint effect is where we are in the world. Because basically now everybody is an agency. Everybody is a media company. We also have a tendency of thinking in this conjoint effect that we have new things like this brandless world. Oh yeah, I need shampoo. I order it through online and it comes in this really simplistic packaging. It's so fresh and new. Yeah, it happened in 1972. Again, pattern recognition, very important. So banning the average. How do we move away from thinking of everybody as the same? How do we personalize more? How do we understand our audiences? Who makes up our audiences? The people who are on the fringe, who are on the edge, they're just as important as those in the middle. The 9 different types of intelligence. Are we hiring for that in our organizations? Are we just thinking of this person has this skill set, they're perfect for right now, not realizing that doesn't help with evolution? And then the third area, how are we remixing the past? Do we have the right people looking at these trends to figure out what the future trends might be? And are we all in a room thinking about that in a diverse and inclusive manner? So I'm a big fan of Alvin Toffler. He wrote a book in 1972 called Future Shock. The one thing that he noted is that we all need to learn, unlearn, and relearn things. So if there's anything that I want you to take away from today in terms of learning, ban those averages. Think of the different types of intelligence and study retro trends. Unlearn that strictly technological transformation drives organizational change. Actually, technology helps with that, but people drive that organizational change. And then relearn the ABCDs: audience, behavior, convergence, and design, as well as play. They'll all help you see the business world a little bit differently. So I'll leave you with this. Business, more than any other occupation, is a continual dealing with the future. It is a continual calculation and instinctive exercise in foresight. My name's Geoffrey Cologne. I work for Microsoft Advertising. I hope I was able to give you some foresight today. Thank you very much.